Welcome back, everybody, to our studies in family law for the Law Academy. This is the first lesson of the new series, fundamentally, and we did an introductory video a few months ago, and this is going to be the first lesson starting in January 2025. That is for people who are accessing this content for free. For members-only content, or for members-only level 2 and above, you've had access to this since June of 2024. Now, just like with company law, there are a few things that are going to be changing when it comes to the ways in which I present these lessons, as well as some of the additional supplementary material for these lessons. Firstly, as I just mentioned, if you are a level 2 or above member on this channel, you are able to access these lessons early. In fact, you have been able to access these lessons for a great number of months early, okay? This is essentially to allow me to still provide free education, as much free education as possible. The content is still freely available to everybody, but to still also be able to have people be able to contribute financially to be able to keep this project going, which essentially allows me to have lessons that are scheduled for releasing in the future, and for those people to see that content early, and then for everybody else to get access to it in the future as well. That's essentially the point, and a very good feature that YouTube has introduced recently, which I have actually absolutely taken advantage of. That's the first point. The second point is, from the next lesson onwards, there will be a little date stamp in the corner of the video. As I have mentioned, and I just mentioned there, this is being recorded in June, and it won't be released to the public until January 2025. Now, of course, because law changes every now and then, it's important to remember that that if I'm recording a lesson now, some things might change in the future that could affect the impact of this lesson. And I don't want you to think that there is something wrong. It is just because this is as up to date as it could be for the time at which it is being recorded. So, to allow for you to essentially keep in the back of your mind the fact that some lessons, okay, have been recorded and have been made a lot earlier than they have been released, there'll be a little timestamp that tells you when this video is being made. So this is not there at the moment, but it will be there from the next video starting next week. And these lessons have been made in sort of June 2024. For the most part, law doesn't change as much as people like to suggest that it does. Key questions and key elements of law basically stay the same throughout, and don't often change that much. But where there are changes, I would like to keep in mind the fact that there is obviously a limitation of doing video lessons and leaving them on the internet for many years, is that there will be updates in the law that need to be addressed. And maybe in 5 years' time, when there are a significant number of updates that need to be made, I might do a whole series of updated lessons on all of the content that we have covered. But for now, that is what the thing that's going to happen is there's going to be a little timestamp in here. And if there are any updates or any court decisions, for example, that overturn or uphold previous principles that are discussed in the lessons, feel free to comment them down below, and I'll pin that at the top of the comment for people to just try and get so that they have the most up-to-date content possible. The third thing that is different and that is new, and as I mentioned on the previous, on the company law lessons, is that at the end of every single one of these videos, there will be a bibliography which has for the citations for the video and further reading for those who want to go into more detail. This is to just essentially allow you to know where this content has come from and to know the resources that are available to you for being able to go into this in more detail and to have a better, greater understanding. This is something that doesn't seem to be a practice that is followed by any other legal teachers or anybody who does teaches law or anything, in fact, on these channels, and it's a practice that I would like to essentially enshrine more and more throughout these series. All of the lessons prior to this have had the citations and the further reading in the description, but I want to put them front and center, and so also for me to essentially discuss a little bit at the end which sources are more valuable, in my opinion, for certain topics, because not every textbook covers the material in a way that is good. So some textbooks might cover certain bits of material better than others. And then finally, in line with all of that conversation, I've also started a Law Academy Substack page, which is going to essentially have a much more detailed, further reading, case notes, and all the different kinds of things for all of these different topics as well. That will be linked in the playlists for these topics and also in the description as well. And this will be the case for every single module that we have covered, and basically allow you to follow along with a full up-to-date and detailed reading list, just like you would be if you were doing a university degree module in this topic as well. Again, this is to say essentially connect the video content with some of the more written digital content, and to allow you again to have a greater understanding of this material. Okay, so those are all the points of reference that I needed to get off my chest. Let's now get into the content of this video. We're talking about family relationships in this video, and we're going to be talking about family relationships for the next few videos fundamentally, this is the first major lesson on the subject of family law, where we're going to spend some time talking about arguably one of the most substantive areas of family law itself, of course, talking about the nature of the familial relationship. There are various different legal forms of the family relationship. That includes cohabitation, that includes marriage, it includes civil partnership, as well as the sort of mirror to that, which is the sort of end of the family relationship, including things like nullity and divorce. These are all conversations that we're going to be spending for the next few lessons' time looking at. So, family law as a discipline is generally a particularly diverse area. There's a lot of things it could be talking about. So it should also be noted that the conceptualization, the traditional conceptualization of the family has also changed significantly over the years. And we will get to the ways in which it has changed as a result of the secularization of the family, as well as the imposition of new rights for individuals who have been historically excluded from this sort of traditional understanding of the family. The traditional dynamic of the family, of course, can be seen in the idea of the, quote, traditional nuclear family. The traditional nuclear family, despite what a lot of conservatives might suggest, is not actually that old. It comes from some quite Americanized conceptions of the family from the 1950s, from the Cold War. Of course, we can see the ways in which the Cold War has influenced society over the years. And it is this idea of a one-man, one-woman marriage with a number of children, often 2 or 3 children. And you can sort of look at the picture on the thumbnail image that we have above here, and this is the sort of traditional understanding of the traditional nuclear family. You have a man and a woman, you have children, and this is all very, very nice and neat and clean. This is what, understandably, is what is conceived of as the traditional nuclear family. But the idea of having law, specifically family law, only covering this very limited definition of the family is obviously a little bit difficult, and obviously is a conceptualization which would merit further consideration. It would be very limited to have a family law that is limited to the definition of the family being this sort of traditional nuclear family dynamic. Instead, you need to have a family law which is inclusive and all-inclusive to all different types of familial arrangements and family relationship. And so when we think about modern conceptualizations of the family, there is, of course, there are a lot of considerations that need to be taken into account. This is not to suggest that the traditional family dynamic or the traditional nuclear family is to be thrown out. It is still very, very popular. It is still obviously a very basic understanding of how familial relationships have developed and been devised over the years. There's nothing wrong with a traditional family dynamic, of course, and it is still very popular. However, of course, because law is an inclusive field, law could not operate, and it could not work if it is not inclusive. It is not as inclusive as it should be in some areas, but it is one that has to account for all of the different kinds of familial relationships that exist. So, for example, we have to ask questions like whether or not marriage is necessary for the family dynamic, whether or not children are necessary for a family dynamic. What about the considerations of this idea of a man and a woman in a family dynamic? What about LGBTQ rights? How do these take into account the nature of the family, and how this changes the traditional dynamic of the family? What about situations of divorce or about single parents households? These also change this basic traditional family dynamic as well, all of which have to still be part of this inclusive realm of family law, because otherwise family law wouldn't be very particularly effective if it only dealt with the traditional family dynamic, given that there are the ideas of people who don't want children, the people who don't want to get married, the people who have been married and have been divorced, the people who have been married and have had children have got divorced, the people who aren't just man and woman but man and man, or woman and woman, all of these different things. What about the inclusion of trans rights in these debates as well, all of which are necessary for an inclusive and up-to-date and a modern and therefore an effective conceptualization of a family law. So, in taking an overview of this particular conversation, I want to just begin by thinking about the concept of marriage in conjunction to the idea of cohabitation. The fastest growing family relationship today is the concept of cohabitation, not necessarily the concept of marriage. Marriage is still very, very popular, but in terms of growth in recent years, cohabitation has been the most the quickest to grow over the last few years. Cohabitation refers to living with another individual. So, for example, in a house or in a flat sharing situation. It is distinct from the concept of marriage because, of course, it is not where there is a legal binding authority between these two individuals. It is also distinct in the sense that it does not always include family elements. So, for example, if you share a flat with someone and you have a flatmate, these are people who are cohabiting together. There is cohabitation, but there's not family cohabitation. They're not necessarily in a family relationship or forming a family. They could just be in student housing. Many of you who are studying at university right now will be in student housing or in halls of residence and all these different kinds of things. You're not in a relationship with all your student housing mates. That would be a bit weird. And so as a result of which, this is an example of cohabitation which doesn't necessarily have familial elements to it. Another contrasting element is this relationship between marriage and the concept of the civil partnership. Now, one of the most important issues when it comes to marriage over the last 10 or so years, over the last 20 or so years, in fact, is this idea that marriage need not be strictly limited to a man and a woman, as it shouldn't be limited to a man and a woman. The right for same-sex marriage has been a controversial issue. The reason why it's been controversial is, of course, because of deeply enshrined conservative beliefs for a start, but also these deeply enshrined conservative beliefs deriving from things like religious elements. Okay, the traditional concept of marriage in religion is seen to be a sacrament which is between a man and a woman. Of course, given the fact that England is a Christian country, we have the fact that the monarchy is not only the head of state but also in charge and head of the Church of England. It means that there is a certain question that has to be raised in that regard. Now, fundamentally, it is just religious, let's just say a lack of religious tolerance, shall we say, when it comes to same-sex marriage. And it's something that took a few years to essentially bring into the fold. And it started with civil partnership, which is this idea of essentially trying to appease both religious individuals and people who are obviously campaigning for LGBTQ plus rights. And this is an example of where they try to balance that, where they have, well, you can have marriage basically, but marriage in all but name, in the sense that you have all the benefits of being married to an individual, but we can't call it marriage, we have to call it civil partnership. This worked for a time, and this sort of was seen as a step forward in terms of the progression of LGBTQ plus rights, but of course it still shows that there is a distinction between people who are straight and people who are gay, and this of course is not on. And as a result of which, it took until 2014 for there to be the inclusion of same-sex marriage into the broader concepts of marriage in law. Now, we will get to this in future lessons time. We'll get to what the nature of civil partnership actually meant, and we'll get to the ways in which this developed into same-sex marriage. But for now, to note that when we think about marriage, the most controversial issue in the last 20 years has, of course, been this idea of same-sex partnerships. So, in terms of reading, like I said, we have a number of different sources that I have written up for you here. In the further reading section, in fact, there is a legal practice course textbook, The Family Law by Sabine from 2024. For those of you who are not doing the LPC or not doing anything akin to the LPC, I'd probably steer away from that textbook if you're going into further reading. In terms of the just basic, your bog standard textbook for family law, I would refer to texts like Herring. Heenan and Heenan's Concentrate is obviously quite good. Not been updated for a while though. 2020 was its last update, as well as the 2023 Herring Express Revision Guide, which is obviously also very, very good. But other than that, some further reading includes George Attell's Text Cases and Materials series. I have an older edition of that. I think I have the 4th or even the 3rd edition to that textbook, so mine's a little bit out of date. And as well as this, you have also Lowe's Bromley's Family Law, the 12th edition from 2021.